Welcome to another episode from the Phoenix Mystery School. This episode is the inner critic. This is one of the most common things that I deal with my clients. It is a big theme for many. And there's many different reasons as to why the inner critic develops from what I have observed over 10 years of sessions and thousands of clients. So, the first thing that is the most common that pops up is the criticism from their environment growing up, whether it was family or institutions like school, religion, sports, whatever the case may be. And I know a lot of the old dynamic around raising kids was to thicken their skin, so to speak, to not make them so sensitive. So, in doing so, what I've observed is a lot of criticism. And this is not constructive criticism. They're two very different things. But when you consider being in the home and being yelled at as a child for maybe spilling a little bit of water, maybe spilling a little bit of milk, or maybe spilling a little bit of paint, and if it's a constant thing over time as a child, as they grow, that anything that they do becomes criticized. Any decision that they make becomes criticized or told that it was wrong or not the right decision or not a good decision that they made. There's a difference between the parenting style of saying, hey, how did that decision work out for you? It doesn't seem like it was a positive outcome. What did you learn? Versus, I can't believe that you did that. What is wrong with you? You should know better. Can you hear the difference in both of those sentences? They're essentially saying the same thing, but through a very different lens. One is helping the person to understand what they did, helping them to open up to what the outcome was. So, getting them to learn about action and consequence without criticizing, without that lens of beating them down. And I know this can't apply to everything, okay? There's a spectrum of everything. So, this is not talking about extreme situations because I know there's a lot of things that are happening right now with children, with their behaviors and how they respond to their environment and things like that. And I'm not always here to shame parents, but a lot of mentalities and a lot of conditioning is around a lot of survival, and there isn't a lot of emotional intelligence that is taught to our parents, that are taught to us. And I believe that this should be one of the first and foremost things ever taught in school. It should be a literal class in elementary, in middle school, in high school. There should always be emotional and growth mindset classes because not all teachers have that within them. Not all teachers teach that when they are communicating with their students. Same with parents. Same with even religious institutions and many other places. Even in the medical and justice field, from my experience, same thing. I've dealt with a lot in those institutions where there was a lot of criticism towards me, even though I did nothing wrong, even though I was fighting for my right to health and safety. And this was at a very young age. So things get imprinted, especially from the ages of conception. So even in the womb, there's a lot that happens in the womb. How your parents feel, whether they're together or not, doesn't matter. What's going on in the environment at the time, it can have a lot of effects on the growing fetus. So again, not saying this to scare the crap out of parents, because I know this happens. You're like, oh my gosh, so much was happening during pregnancy. I've ruined my child. But the thing is, with how we respond to our kids, how we are with our kids can really help them grow out of anything imprinted. But again, it all starts with the emotional intelligence. So that inner critic, the first thing that I say to any of my clients. I want you to take a moment and I want you to think back to your childhood or teen years. Was there anyone that was critical of you? And sometimes they will say, no, well, I don't think so. And I get them to think of family, so immediate family, but then also extended family. Family doesn't just mean your core nuclear family, it also means extended, right? And this happens a lot, especially with bigger families, but also smaller ones too. And then the second thing that I do, if nothing comes to mind whatsoever in their life, I share the definition of criticism, which is the expression of disapproval of someone or something based on perceived faults or mistakes. So when we're growing up, we make a lot of decisions. We make a lot of mistakes. But what I've been trying to teach my daughter is that there are no mistakes, just learning experiences. And if you learned the same thing a couple of times and you don't like it, it then becomes a choice. So once you've learned it a few times, you know it. It's no longer a mistake, it's now a choice. So, is this the choice you really want to make? Is this a positive outcome for you? So, I get my clients to think of that meaning and to go back. Anyone in your core family, anyone in the extended? Was there anyone in your school career, even friends? Some of our closest friends can be some of the most critical people. And especially growing up, kids can be very cruel. And that was also my experience. So if those things are a no, I ask, were you in sports, extracurriculars? When did you start working? Because here's the other thing, if it hasn't happened in your childhood necessarily, some people start working at the age of 15. And when you start working, most of the time, from my observation with clients, again, myself, and all these different years, is that so many work environments are actually quite toxic, where people have nothing to say to you unless you've done something wrong. And then that opens up a whole other scenario of criticism. It's not just like a friendly correction, it becomes like a beratement. And this happened to me a lot too when I was in the career that I was in previously. So, thinking of your work environment, even if it was in childhood, teenage years, even in your young adulthood, or think of all of your career or your work experience over the course of your lifetime. Was there a critical boss or a critical management team? Was there an unhealthy work atmosphere? And sometimes when we don't know what healthy is, we don't know what the unhealthy versions are. We think it's normal. We could think that these very toxic behaviors, it's just normal. It's what people are like. I'm used to it. I grew up with it. So then we start talking about what a healthy work environment looks like, what a healthy home life looks like. And of course, nothing is ever perfect. But here's the thing, the pattern of criticism doesn't just start with a handful of events. It starts with the same pattern repeating for at least 3 to 6 months. So for the inner critic, this criticism, they've more than likely received outside of themselves before this started. And it was ongoing for more than 3 and 6 months. It probably more than likely went on for years and years and years. It could be even just the subtle comments that are made about your weight, that are made about how you look, about how you learn, how you do chores even, or how you color a certain way. How many of us just actually let our kids color the way that they want to? Yeah, I know they have to learn certain basics, obviously, with art, But when have you ever let your kid have free play with art, where it didn't have to have a specific outcome or goal, where they didn't have to do things quote unquote right? Do you let them do things abstract? Or when they do something and it doesn't work out for them, do you ask them what they learned and show them another way instead of just jumping in and taking over immediately? So it can seem very small, but when it happens over time, over and over and over, and if there was absolutely zero choice as a child to make, there are lots of choices that kids and teenagers can make on their own. But I've also observed and witnessed that in many of my clients, it was always the families making all of the choices. And I'm not talking about big choices. It could start when they're really small, giving them the choice between two outfits that they want to wear for the next day. It could be giving them a choice between two different vegetables, or if they want it raw or cooked, or allowing them to listen intuitively to when they're full or not. There's a lot of age appropriate decisions. So if someone's always making decisions, and if you think back for yourself, who made all the decisions? Sometimes it's all everyone else making the choices for the person, or it goes into the reverse, where all the responsibility was actually inappropriately placed on them as a young teenager or child. So a lot of this will reaffirm a belief around not being good enough. A lot of it will turn into defensiveness. A lot of it can be a lot of suppressed anger as well. So when you've been in these situations, it gets frustrating. And often you might either learn to keep it in or keep it in long enough until you explode. So once you've figured out where this pattern of criticism is coming from, it's easy to figure out, is this internal critic voice in my head mine? Or did it start with that person? Because often when we hear this inner critic, we just assume it's our voice. But for people who have been highly criticized their entire life, that voice of their mom or dad or aunt or grandfather or teacher becomes internalized. And once they're out of that family unit or institution or wherever it was, they keep hearing that voice, but it turns into their own over time. It keeps going with the criticism because on some level, they have felt either not good enough, capable enough. There's usually some emotion attached to this, or multiple emotions too. So the next thing is once you've figured out the inner critic, where it's coming from, and even if you don't figure it out, it's fine too. If you don't know, it's okay. You can still continue with these steps. You can ask if it's your voice or someone else's. And then asking yourself, what is the emotional wound here? What am I feeling? What emotion is it, and where is it in my body? Often for me, when this has come up for me, I have felt disappointment and it's in my gut. So feeling like a disappointment to others, feeling like I've let other people down. And the stomach is a very common place. So is the chest and heart, sometimes the back and neck. It could be literally anywhere though, any organ, endocrine, or body part. It doesn't matter where. But these are just some common areas because the stomach represents how we digest life events. Not just food, but how we move through life events. So then I ask my clients, figure out the emotions, where it is in the body, and I want you to breathe into that space. I want you to be present. I want you to witness and be in the emotion. And I'm just going to put a side note here, as long as this is not PTSD related, okay? When it comes to things like that, I trust people who are able to deal with PTSD, so registered psychologists and therapists and things like that. I would never guide someone into something that's PTSD related. So if you have CPTSD or PTSD, make sure that you get confirmation that doing something like this is okay for you and not a trigger. So going back into it, guiding my clients into that emotion, to feel it, to be present with it, because once you give it time and space, it will begin to dissipate. But sometimes it's hard to connect. And that's when you have to remind yourself that you're actually safe. You are safe to connect to this emotion. That this connection is what's going to liberate you from this continued suffering and this pattern. So feeling into that emotion, giving it time and space, but then directing love and compassion and whatever else you need towards yourself. I want you to raise your hand if any of you are so good at giving love and compassion to others, but struggle with giving it to yourself. And this is truly the work. If you've been highly criticized, it's hard to see the good things about you. It's hard to see the loving things about you. It's hard to think that there's anything good about you. So when you're in this space, you are connecting with that sense of love, connecting with compassion and understanding. So think of how much you give that to other people, if that applies to you, and how that feels. And then I want you to direct that same feeling, but to you instead. Because as you're starting to dissipate an emotion, it needs to be filled with another. This is how we transform energy. And I'm not going to say that this is a negative emotion that you're holding on to either, because it's not. It's just the suppression of an emotion over time. No emotions are negative. They only seem and feel negative when we've ignored them for a long time. So remind yourself that it is safe to give yourself the time and space that you need to move through these emotions, witness and observe them, so that your body can release the active emotional charge. And so these memories aren't so painful in the subconscious. Even if you're not consciously thinking about them, they are active in your subconscious all the time, wherever they are stored. So once you've directed the love and compassion, you will feel it start to dissipate over time. It may not completely subside in that time that you're given. And that's okay. Just know that it'll continue to dissipate, but really feel into the core of that emotional wound. Notice any beliefs that pop up around it as well. And just notice them, but allow them to release. And if you need to, you can have your hand over the emotional wound area and one hand over the colon or large intestine, which would be, if you're looking down on yourself, the lower left of the abdomen, so just to the left of the navel. Connecting these areas allows that emotion to move into the intestinal region, which is a normal way of releasing. You might notice you have to go to the bathroom after as well. You might have a noticeable bowel movement, or you might actually have to, urinate a lot more. And that is normal because emotions, they do take up space. They may be energy, but they take up space. So allow it to release. And really just keep in your mind, who are you on the other side of this release? Who do you get to become? And then when I end with anything like that, I like to wrap my arms around myself and just give myself a big hug. And the hug I would like you to do is just taking your right hand, placing it over the left rib cage if you're looking down on yourself, and taking your left hand and placing it on the elbow. And if you like, you can gently rock side to side. And once you've done this, you can then logically process the emotion if you choose. You can then understand why things happened the way that they did, why you felt the way that you did, without blame, but refrain from intellectualizing your emotions when you're in them. You can logically process after the fact, but do not do that while you're feeling the emotion because you cannot heal them with logic. That is not how emotions work, unfortunately. If we could logic our way out of it, I'm sure a majority of us wouldn't be in it. But intellectualizing them and trying to logically process them before they've actually been processed is what keeps us in avoidance. It keeps us from feeling and being connected to the process. So give that a go and just notice how your inner critic starts to change. I would also love to hear from you if you did this process and how it worked for you. Did you feel a difference in your body? Were you able to connect? Were you able to create that safe space for yourself so you could drop in? And typically, if something keeps coming up for you, like that inner critic, you're like, oh, I need to deal with it. I need to deal with it. And I'm very aware of it. Usually, that is your sign from the subconscious that you have the tools and resources to deal with it. So keep reminding yourself how safe you are within yourself. And in that process, just try and let go of the mental thoughts. It doesn't have to be completely clear, but you can just kind of push those thought bubbles to the side or blow them away. I like doing stuff like that. I know it might seem silly, but having some action and knowing what it represents can be very helpful in getting you into the focus process. You can make this a whole ritual if you like. You can put on some sort of solfeggio frequencies if you like that, or soft meditation music. You can light candles. You can do whatever you want, or you can just go through it simply. So leave me comments or email me at trinitysage333@gmail.com and just let me know what your experience was. I'll be very curious, and I really hope this helps your inner critic, that inner judgment. And I hope you can begin to release that, knowing where it's coming from and working with your emotional wounds. The other thing I will say as well is that anytime you have judgment and criticism coming up about yourself, try to catch it in the moment. Try to catch that thought and try to reframe it. You get to create your realities and beliefs. We don't even know where thoughts come from in the first place, so how do we know they're even yours? You know? So I try to look at thoughts as if, well, most of them are probably not mine, but I can also change them if I choose. I'm not a slave to my thoughts, much like we're not a slave to our emotions. We can change them. We can change our frequency. We can change that reality anytime. It's not easy and it can be difficult. Yes, absolutely. Easier said than done. But it's a work in progress and it takes discipline. So catch those thoughts, reframe it in the opposite. So if you're saying, oh, I'm not good at this, you could say something like, I am learning how to do this. And through these perceived setbacks, I am learning how to do it more efficiently. That is what a growth mindset is. Start implementing it and see your life change. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Cassandra Finch, and I'll see you on the next one.